My God, that's me. The words slipped out of Jasmine's mouth like a secret too heavy to hold. Her hands, still gripping the edge of the crystal tray she was serving champagne with, began to tremble. There, in a hallway she wasn't even supposed to be in, surrounded by opulence worth more than her entire life savings, hung a golden-framed photo that stopped her breath. A little girl. Curly hair, shy eyes, and a familiar pink dress. That wasn't just any child. That was her, at 4 years old. She couldn't blink, couldn't breathe. The hallway inside the Blackwell estate was silent, almost reverent, like a museum holding relics of power and legacy. And somehow her face, her childhood, was among them. Jasmine Mitchell, 24, had spent years navigating glittering ballrooms as a waitress, serving drinks to Chicago's elite. She'd poured champagne into crystal flutes, exchanged polite smiles with billionaires, and blended into the background like wallpaper. But she never imagined a ghost from her forgotten past would be waiting for her inside one of the city's most untouchable mansions. Raised in foster homes, Jasmine had grown up knowing only fragments of her story, most of them vague, painful, or wrapped in mystery. Social workers told her there had been complications. A fire. Lost records. No names. No photos. Just years of bouncing between homes. Always wondering why no one had come for her. Why no one had wanted her. Now she had her answer. Richard Blackwell. Only 30 minutes earlier, Richard himself had brushed past her in the grand hall, not sparing her so much as a glance. He hadn't even looked at her. And yet, his house displayed her picture like a hidden treasure, tucked away in a wing reserved for family only. Hey, what are you doing back here? The bark of a security guard ripped Jasmine out of her daze. Sorry, she stammered, faking a casual laugh. Got turned around looking for the restroom. Stay out of private areas, he snapped. She nodded quickly and walked away, but not before burning every detail of that photo into her mind. Back in the main ballroom, she moved like a ghost through the party, her eyes locked on Richard Blackwell, polished in a black tuxedo, shaking hands, raising flutes, and waxing poetic about his charitable work with underprivileged children. The crowd ate it up. But Jasmine saw something else. A fraud. A man who built a kingdom of pity and praise while quietly hiding his darkest sin in a frame. And when he talked about the personal tragedy that inspired his philanthropy, Jasmine froze. I lost a daughter 20 years ago, Richard said, his voice drenched in carefully curated sorrow. That pain never leaves you. It's why I dedicate my life to helping abandoned children. Lost. Not given away. Not discarded like trash. It took everything in Jasmine not to scream. She watched him like a predator watch his prey. Every gesture, every word, every false note in his speech. And for the first time in her life, she saw clearly. She hadn't just been lost. She had been thrown away. Erased. And now this man wore grief like a designer suit and collected awards for his courage. But Jasmine wasn't here for reconciliation. She wasn't going to burst into tears and call him Dad. No. Her smile, barely forming at the corner of her lips, said everything. This wasn't a moment of reunion. This was the beginning of war. Richard Blackwell didn't just abandon his daughter. He made her invisible. And Jasmine was done being unseen. 3 days passed, but the photo haunted her. Every time she shut her eyes, she saw that little girl, herself, frozen in a frame like a forgotten memory. She needed answers. But where do you start when the man you're investigating is practically royalty? That's when she thought of Marcus, the grizzled bartender who had worked every elite Chicago event for decades. If anyone knew the real stories behind the tuxedos and pearls, it was him. She cornered him during a late shift at another gala. Hey Marcus, what do you know about Richard Blackwell? Marcus almost spilled his drink. Girl, he said, lowering his voice. You don't want to go poking around that man's business. Jasmine forced a casual shrug. Why not? Marcus looked around to make sure no one was listening. There've been whispers for years way back. About a daughter he had. Disappeared one day, like she never existed. No records. No follow-up. Like she was erased. Jasmine's heart thudded. She already knew the truth. But now she had proof that others knew something too. This wasn't just a mystery. It was a cover-up. One Richard Blackwell had spent decades hiding behind charity galas and media praise. But Jasmine wasn't just going to uncover the truth. She was going to burn down the empire he built on her absence. And this time, she wouldn't be invisible. Jasmine's blood turned to ice. 4 years old. That was her age in the photo. The same age her mother had allegedly died in what the papers had called a tragic household accident. But what Marcus said next chilled her even more. After the accident, Blackwell inherited millions, he muttered, lowering his voice. His wife's life insurance was worth a fortune. And the little girl? She just vanished. No funeral. No obituary. Nothing. It's like she never existed. Jasmine swallowed hard. But he talks so much about orphans, about helping the helpless, she said almost to herself. Marcus let out a dark, bitter laugh. Exactly. Nothing cleans a guilty conscience like a non-profit with your name in gold on every building. Philanthropy's the best cover in the world. That night, Jasmine couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with half-memories, flashes of warmth, of a woman's soft voice, a lullaby she hadn't heard in 2 decades. She fired up her laptop and began creating fake accounts. Social media, charity registries, even court archives. She searched everything. What she found painted a terrifying picture. Richard Blackwell had remarried 3 times after the death of his first wife. Each woman younger than the last, each one signing airtight prenuptial agreements. None of those marriages lasted more than 2 years. He moved on quickly. Too quickly. But it was what she uncovered about her biological mother, Helena Blackwell, that shattered her. Helena wasn't just Richard's wife. She was a fierce advocate for children's rights, a crusader fighting to clean up the broken adoption system. An old news article showed her smiling beside a protest sign demanding accountability from private adoption agencies. Jasmine scrolled further. One headline caught her breath. Child welfare activist investigates alleged adoption ring, goes silent weeks later. The date. Just 2 weeks before Helena's fatal accident. Jasmine printed everything. Articles, marriage records, foundation reports. She laid them all out across her tiny apartment table and mapped a timeline. Helena began investigating adoption fraud. 2 weeks later, she's dead. Richard inherits millions. Their daughter vanishes. Months later, Richard launches a charity for orphans and builds a billion-dollar empire as a grieving father. Jasmine stared at the mess of papers. This wasn't coincidence. This was murder. And she needed help. The next morning at the cafe where she worked, she spotted a familiar figure. Margaret Santos, retired private investigator, 65, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, known to everyone as a legend who took no nonsense and could still read people like a lie detector. Jasmine approached with her best cappuccino in hand. Margaret, I need a favor. Margaret raised a brow. Judging by that look on your face, I'm guessing it's not a small one. I need information. On someone powerful. Margaret sipped the cappuccino slowly, eyeing her over the rim. How much can you pay? I can't. But I'll work for you. Cleaning. Filing. Anything. Just please. The older woman tapped her fingers thoughtfully, then gave a wry smile. It's been a while since I've had a case worth chasing. Tell me everything. Jasmine poured out the entire story. Margaret scribbled notes in her worn leather notebook, occasionally glancing up with a look that slowly changed from skepticism to steel-eyed resolve. When Jasmine finished, Margaret closed the notebook and said, Sweetheart, you're not just looking for your father. You're about to bring down a predator who probably murdered your mother. What Margaret uncovered over the following days was worse than Jasmine had ever imagined. He didn't just abandon you, she said grimly. He forged documents stating you died in the same accident that killed Helena. Margaret laid down a stack of papers, death certificates, hospital forms, and insurance claims. Jasmine stared at the one with her own name. A fake death certificate, Margaret said. He told the state your body was never recovered. Claimed both of you were lost. Collected $500,000 in life insurance on you. Jasmine's stomach lurched. Her supposed death had made him rich. And that's how he started the foundation, Margaret added, voice tightening. It was all built on that lie. He used your death, and your mother's, to become a saint in the public eye. Margaret continued flipping pages. But here's where it gets darker. Helena knew something. 2 weeks before she died, she hired a PI. She suspected Richard was selling children through illegal adoption rings. What happened to the investigator? Jasmine asked. Vanished. Just like Helena. Just like you. Then Margaret handed her a photo. Blurry, grainy, but damning. It was a hospital record. Helena didn't die in that accident, Margaret said. She survived. For 2 hours. Long enough to talk to a nurse. What did she say? Jasmine whispered. She said, "Please protect my daughter from him." Jasmine's hands shook. Her mother had died afraid. Afraid for her. But Jasmine wasn't that scared little girl anymore. And if Richard Blackwell thought she was buried and forgotten, he was about to learn the truth the hard way. Some ghosts don't rest until justice is done. Margaret handed her a folder packed with evidence. Everything you need is here. But Jasmine, be careful. This man's capable of anything. Jasmine inhaled deeply. Calm. Cold. Focused. He won't hurt me, she said, a slow, confident smile forming. Because he doesn't even know I exist. And that was her greatest weapon. While Richard Blackwell polished his image and soaked in the applause, Jasmine was already preparing for the moment that would flip his world upside down. The daughter he thought he buried was about to return. Not to reunite. To expose him. And she had already decided exactly how. The Blackwell Foundation's charity gala was a spectacle. Crystal chandeliers, velvet curtains, and a ballroom filled with Chicago's wealthiest elites sipping champagne in honor of orphan children. Cameras flashed, violins played, and at the center of it all stood Richard Blackwell, the celebrated philanthropist. With his $1,000 tuxedo and polished smile, he delivered his annual speech with the confidence of a man who believed he had buried all his sins long ago. But this night was different. In the shadows of the ballroom, a young waitress weaved through the guests. Her hair was swept neatly back, her uniform crisp, her tray steady. No one noticed the fire in her eyes or the storm in her heart. Jasmine Mitchell, or rather Jasmine Helena Blackwell, was no longer the lost daughter of a tragic past. She was the reckoning. On stage, Richard's voice echoed through the hall. As someone who knows the pain of losing a daughter, I dedicate my life to giving second chances. That's what this foundation is all about, turning tragedy into purpose. The audience applauded, their admiration blind. That was when Jasmine stepped forward. She slipped past the assistant at the side of the stage and with unshaking hands, took the microphone. The room fell silent. "Excuse me, Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice slicing through the silence like glass. "May I ask you a question?" Richard blinked, clearly irritated. "Miss, shouldn't you be serving drinks?" "Of course," Jasmine replied, her smile calm and bitter. "But as the daughter of so-called orphans, your speech really spoke to me. Especially when you said you lost a daughter." Richard's expression faltered. "That's a personal tragedy. I'd rather not go into details." "That's unfortunate," Jasmine replied, her tone tightening, "because I have some very interesting details about your lost daughter." Richard stared at her, finally studying her face. And in that moment something shifted. His jaw locked. His breath caught. "She didn't die in an accident," Jasmine said. "You abandoned her. After killing her mother to get her inheritance." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Richard's face drained of color. "And the daughter you buried for money?" Jasmine smiled. "She's right here, asking her father some questions." A ripple of chaos swept through the room. "You can't be Jasmine Helena Mitchell," she interrupted. "Or should I say Jasmine Helena Blackwell? Your daughter. The one you declared dead so you could collect $500,000 in life insurance." Murmurs turned into shouts. Cameras turned their lenses on Richard, who looked ready to collapse. Jasmine lifted a thick envelope. "Here are the fake death certificates you filed. Here are the life insurance claims you cashed in. And here," she held up a blown-up image, "is my mother's autopsy report. It proves she didn't die in an accident. She was poisoned 2 hours after surviving the crash." Richard staggered back, reaching for the mic, but Jasmine was quicker. "And just so we're clear," she said, nodding toward the large screen behind them, "let's take a look at what you've been hiding in your private office." The screen lit up. A childhood photo of Jasmine appeared, framed pristine. The back inscription flashed next. To the most amazing dad in the world. I love you, Jasmine. The room went silent. 20 years, Jasmine said, her voice steady and low. I grew up believing I wasn't wanted, that my parents were gone. But you built your empire on our graves. You turned my mother's murder and my fake death into a brand. Into millions. Margaret Santos stepped to the edge of the stage, raising her phone. She had recorded everything. You even hired me, Jasmine continued, letting out a bitter laugh. To serve champagne at the gala honoring orphans. The same gala that exists because of the lie that I died. Richard lunged again. You have no real proof. Jasmine turned back to the audience, eyes blazing. Press. Did you receive the files I sent? The recordings of Richard telling his lawyer how he got rid of the problem. His wife and daughter. A wave of flashes exploded across the room. Phones buzzed. Journalists shouted. Guests stood in shock. Some were already on their phones, canceling donations. Richard's world began to unravel before his eyes. You planned this, he muttered, horror dawning in his expression. Of course I did, Jasmine said, stepping forward. You taught me well. Revenge, she whispered, is best served cold. Then she leaned closer, almost tenderly. And Dad, 20 years is a long time to chill. The room erupted. Security rushed forward. Guests began leaving in waves. Sponsors stormed out, appalled. Richard stood alone on stage, his legacy collapsing in real time. The press circled him like vultures. Jasmine stepped off the stage, past the guests who now saw her not as a waitress, but as a ghost returned from the dead to deliver justice. As she walked into the night, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. Richard Blackwell had spent 2 decades hiding his sins behind charity. Tonight, he met the one person he never expected. The daughter who survived. The daughter who remembered. And the daughter who was now finally free. As Jasmine stepped down from the stage, her eyes locked with the man who had once erased her from existence. Oh, and Richard, she said, pausing with calculated grace, you'll be thrilled to know the FBI is on their way. Insurance fraud. Murder. Money laundering. They said my evidence is more than sufficient. The sirens were already wailing in the distance. Red and blue lights flashed through the ballroom windows as the once celebrated philanthropist Richard Blackwell stood frozen. For 2 decades, he had lived comfortably off the fortune gained from burying his wife and faking his daughter's death. And now, that same daughter stared at him with the same cold indifference he had shown her all those years ago. As the agents cuffed him and began reading his rights, the room erupted. Gasps, phones recording, reporters already dictating headlines. Richard Blackwell's empire was crumbling in real time. And as he was escorted out in disgrace, one unspoken question clung to the air. Could a family shattered by greed ever find redemption? Or were some wounds simply too deep to heal? Even after justice had been served? 6 months later, the nameplate on the office door read, Helena Blackwell Foundation, Executive Director, Jasmine Mitchell. The room looked nothing like it did when Richard had sat there playing philanthropist. Gone were the mahogany walls and gilded decor. In their place were child-made drawings, bright colors, and open windows that welcomed light. Jasmine, now 25, sat behind the desk once owned by the man who tried to erase her existence. But today she wasn't surviving, she was leading. The FBI had frozen and audited all of Richard's assets, uncovering that only 12% of the donations ever reached orphans. The rest? Lavish trips, private jets, luxury homes, and hush money. Now those funds were finally being used for their intended purpose. Ironic, isn't it? Said Margaret, now Jasmine's official assistant, as she flipped through financial reports. He used your mother's death to build an empire. And you're using the wreckage of that empire to build hope. Jasmine smiled, signing a check that would fund the foundation's 5th new orphanage. Justice is about restoration, not revenge, she said softly. But a little irony never hurts. Jasmine's transformation was nothing short of astonishing. The woman who once served champagne in silence now graced the covers of Time, Forbes, and Vanity Fair. The daughter who came back from the dead read one headline. Another. From orphan to icon. How Jasmine Mitchell exposed America's biggest charity fraud. TV networks offered exclusive interviews. Influencers hailed her as a voice for justice. Time magazine even named her one of the 30 most influential people of the year. "You're more famous than he ever was," laughed Marcus, the former bartender who now served as the foundation's event coordinator. "He spent his whole life building a legacy, and you destroyed it in 20 minutes." And indeed, Richard's fall was both swift and spectacular. Each month, new headlines revealed the consequences of his downfall. His investors, who poured over $8.2 million into the fraudulent foundation, sued to recover their losses. His 3 ex-wives broke their confidentiality agreements and published bestsellers: Married to a Monster, Life with a Psychopath, and How I Escaped a Killer. The golf club where Richard once held court stripped his name from their annual tournament. The university that gave him an honorary doctorate removed his name from their library. Even his longtime church asked that he not return, even after his release. But the true victory for Jasmine went beyond fame or justice. It was family. During the investigation, Jasmine discovered something else her father tried to erase. Her mother's sister, Sarah, Helena's only sibling, had searched for Jasmine for years after the accident, eventually giving up when authorities confirmed her supposed death. "You have her eyes," Sarah whispered at their first meeting, holding a worn photo of Helena. "She'd be so proud of who you've become." Sarah didn't just become Jasmine's aunt, she became her anchor. Together, they compiled all of Helena's investigative notes. The very case Helena had died trying to expose, corrupt private adoption agencies, was now being reopened. The FBI credited Helena's files for the closure of 12 illegal agencies and the arrest of 47 individuals involved in trafficking children. "Helena didn't die in vain," Sarah said one late night while organizing papers in Jasmine's new office. "She planted the seeds. You made them grow into an entire forest." Richard, meanwhile, lived a vastly different reality. Sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for fraud, money laundering, and murder, he had nothing left. His friends vanished, his assets seized, his name blackened beyond repair. He tried to reach Jasmine through letters, each one intercepted by Margaret. In one of them, Richard wrote, "I was young and stupid when this started. I didn't mean for it to end this way." But none of those letters were answered. Jasmine never needed an apology. What she needed, what she became, was far greater. A voice for the voiceless. A guardian of the children her mother died fighting for. A living reminder that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way back to the surface. And as the sun rose over the newly renamed Helena Blackwell Children's Center, Jasmine stood on the steps, surrounded by laughing kids, press cameras clicking in the distance. Not as a ghost of the past, but as the future her mother had always dreamed of. Justice hadn't just been served. It had healed. One letter, written in shaky handwriting and marked with a prison return address, arrived addressed to Jasmine Mitchell. "If you really are my daughter, please forgive me. I can explain everything." She tore it in half without finishing. Forgiveness, she had learned, was a gift. And murderers didn't deserve gifts. But Jasmine's triumph was never about revenge. It wasn't measured in headlines, magazine covers, or even the luxurious Chicago apartment she now called home. It was written in the 847 letters she received every month from children and families whose lives had been changed by the new foundation that bore her mother's name. "Jasmine, I got a scholarship to study medicine at Harvard," wrote 16-year-old Amanda. "Thank you for teaching me that our past doesn't define our future." "You inspired me to become a lawyer," wrote a 14-year-old boy. "One day I'll fight for children like you fought for your mom." Thanks to the foundation, our family is finally together again after 8 years apart, wrote a mother. "My children are home. Thank you." These were Jasmine's real victories, quiet, honest, and deeply personal. 6 months after Richard Blackwell's arrest, Jasmine appeared on CNN for an exclusive interview with Anderson Cooper. When asked if she still felt anger toward her biological father, she paused. "Anger is a luxury I can't afford," she replied. Richard Blackwell, in his own twisted way, taught me the most valuable lesson of my life: that our origins don't define our destiny. He tried to erase me from history, but all he did was give me a blank page to write my own story. The segment cut to a montage of the Helena Blackwell Foundation in action. 5 modern orphanages, over 200 children receiving top-tier education, 89 families reunited, and 156 scholarships awarded. All funded by the very money Richard thought he had buried forever. The difference between us, Jasmine continued, is that he used tragedy to profit. I used tragedy to empower. He built an empire of lies. I built a legacy of truth. The final moments of the program showed Jasmine standing quietly before her mother's grave. The old worn plaque was gone, replaced by a new headstone carved in soft pink marble. It read, Helena Blackwell, mother, activist, heroine. She fought for those without a voice. Her daughter completed the mission. Jasmine knelt and placed a bouquet of white roses at the base. We did it, Mom, she whispered. Justice finally came, and it came through the daughter he tried to erase, but the one you raised to be indestructible. As she left the cemetery, her phone buzzed with a new notification. She glanced down and smiled. The foundation had just broken its own donation record. More money raised in 1 week than Richard Blackwell had given away in his entire career pretending to be a philanthropist. That night, Jasmine stood by her apartment window overlooking Chicago, reflecting on everything she had endured and overcome. From a forgotten girl serving champagne to the rich, to the face of a movement changing lives across the country, her journey had been anything but ordinary. The phone rang. It was Sarah, her aunt, her anchor, her newfound family. How was your day, dear? Came the familiar voice. Transformative, Jasmine said with a soft laugh. 50 more children were adopted today through our program. That's wonderful, Sarah replied. I just finished organizing the last of Helena's journals. We're going to publish them. A book about her life, about what she stood for. Jasmine's eyes welled with tears. Even in death, she's still saving lives. The best revenge, Jasmine realized, hadn't been destroying Richard Blackwell's empire. Though watching it fall had been deeply satisfying. The real revenge was becoming everything he had only pretended to be, multiplied by 1,000. While he sat in prison, ignored and disgraced, his world reduced to steel bars and concrete walls, Jasmine thrived. She had built a legacy her mother would have been proud of. One of truth, hope, and healing. And every time he saw her face on a television screen or in a newspaper headline, he was reminded of the one fact he could never undo. The daughter he had tried to kill had become a national icon. He had tried to erase her. She rewrote the story. And not just for herself, but for every child like her. Every orphan who had been forgotten. Every family broken by greed. Every voice silenced by systems that were never built to protect them. Richard counted days on a prison calendar. Jasmine counted the lives she changed. Every morning, she woke up in Egyptian cotton sheets, not just as the survivor of a tragedy, but as the architect of a movement. She had become the light her mother dreamed of. And that was a victory no court, no prison, no betrayal could ever steal. If this story of redemption, justice, and unstoppable transformation moved you, subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories. Because in a world full of storms, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is become the lightning.